Blood dripped slowly down Amara Jenkins's face, mixing with the stinging salt of her sweat and the thick red dust of the Arizona desert, forming dark brown streaks like sunburned scars across the land. The sun beat down like a searing blade, scorching every inch of exposed skin, turning each step into sheer agony. On the blistering asphalt that felt like a frying pan, Amara struggled to drag her son, Nathan, a 7-year-old boy, frail and trembling violently from heat stroke. Nathan's tiny legs could barely hold him up. His eyes were puffy after hours of silent crying, and a deep gash on his forehead continued to bleed, soaking the front of his shirt in dark red. No water, no phone, not a single soul or car in sight. And worse than all of that, no hope left. "Please, someone." Amara's voice was no more than a series of dry, broken gasps, like her heart was splintering under the weight of betrayal and being pushed to the edge of endurance. Just 20 minutes earlier, she had been standing in the grand foyer of the Patterson estate, the home that once housed her family. 6 months after David, her husband, died in a suspicious car crash, Amara had believed, at the very least, that her in-laws would be her support system. But today, that illusion had turned to ash. A few stained clothes, Nathan's picture book, and a shattered family photo, strewn by the roadside like garbage no one cared to pick up. That was all that remained after Eleanor Patterson, her mother-in-law, delivered a sentence cold as ice. "You never were, and never will be, worthy of my son." Then the luxury car door slammed shut and drove off, leaving behind a storm of red dust and her mother's heart torn to shreds. Have you ever believed someone would protect you, only for that very person to be the first to abandon you? Amara Jenkins, 32, a literature teacher with a master's degree and an impeccable teaching record, was once the epitome of resilience, intellect, and passion for education. But none of that could erase the color of her skin in the eyes of a pure-blooded, elitist white family steeped in prejudice. They never needed her, never truly wanted her, even if they had once held her hand before the wedding, once promised to love her like a daughter. What they needed was Nathan. A boy with Patterson blood, a prestigious link they weren't willing to let slip away. "It's thirsty, Mommy," Nathan whispered, his voice as faint as a lost breeze in the desert. His lips were cracked, his eyes nearly shut, as if fading away. Amara cradled him tightly, her hands shaking but still trying to shield his tiny body from the merciless sun. Her heart ached, not from physical pain, but from helplessness. To be a mother and yet do nothing but hold your child and wait for a miracle. If you were in that desert, what would you do? Keep walking, even as your feet bled? Or collapse, praying someone might arrive in time? But Amara knew there were no miracles for people like her. She would have to make one herself. The road ahead led nowhere, just shimmering waves of heat dancing like water over the scorched pavement. From a distance it looked like an oasis, but every step forward only brought them closer to despair. The sun burned overhead like an invisible sentence. The wind blew dry and hollow, whispering through her ears like an ancient desert curse. Who would still believe in miracles when they're staring death in the face? Amara leaned in and whispered to the limp child in her arms, "Everything's going to be okay, sweetheart." But deep down she knew it was just a sweet lie, the last one she could offer him. A lie to preserve the thin thread of hope, to keep Nathan from collapsing before she did. Then she uttered a plea, not for herself, but for the fragile life cradled in her arms. "Please," Amara rasped, her voice as raw as sand scraping sunburned skin. My son! He needs help. From a distance, the sound of an engine roared like a voice from heaven. A black Range Rover came to a stop, its tires nearly melting under the scorching heat. A man stepped out, tall, composed, approaching them as one might approach a wounded wild animal. No rush. No threat? I won't touch either of you unless I have your permission, the man said, his voice deep and steady. But the boy's wound needs stitches immediately. You're both in severe heat stroke. Amara gave a faint nod, as if surrendering her life to a stranger, but her eyes never left his every move. When she accepted the cold bottle of water from him, her hands trembled not only from exhaustion, but from something unfamiliar, being helped without being looked down upon. She looked up, really looking into his eyes for the first time. There was no pity, no judgment, just quiet, profound empathy, like he had once stood exactly where she now stood, discarded like trash, on the edge of the world. My name is Marcus Reynolds, he said, as he pulled out gauze and water from the trunk. I can take you both to the nearest hospital. You don't have to trust me, just give me a chance to save the boy. Far in the distance, the Patterson estate loomed like a scar against the fiery orange Arizona sky. From the third floor, Eleanor Patterson lifted a pair of binoculars to her eyes, scanning the direction where the red dust was being torn apart by the stranger's vehicle. They're probably dead by now, she said, cold as stone, eyes unblinking. Richard stood behind her, pouring another glass of whiskey, his smirk bitter. No one's driven down that stretch of road all week. They thought it was over, that the silence of the desert would bury their crime forever beneath the sand. But they were wrong. That unexpected roadside encounter wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a tidal wave that would shatter the false world they had built, and when the red dust settled, the truth would rise. Like a reckoning from the very place they thought would be a grave. Have you ever witnessed a turning point where someone who seemed to have lost everything found the light again? If this story of injustice, prejudice, and hope touches your heart, keep watching. The truth is waiting to be revealed. At Phoenix Memorial Hospital, Amara sat beside the hospital bed, her eyes locked on Nathan's peaceful face, his forehead bandaged, his breathing steady. Her own injuries felt insignificant compared to the relief of seeing her son alive. Miss Jenkins, Dr. Prescuma entered gently. Nathan's results are better than expected. A mild concussion, but he's out of danger. Before she could even exhale, a man in a suit entered the room, followed by 2 police officers. I'm Theodore Fletcher, legal counsel for the Patterson family, he said, his tone rigid as steel. I'm here to discuss custody of the child, Nathan Patterson. Jenkins, Amara interjected, calm but firm. My son's last name is Jenkins. Actually, I have an emergency motion for guardianship. The Pattersons allege serious negligence, claiming you left the home after an argument over inheritance, putting the child in danger. The room turned thick with tension until Marcus spoke up, his voice as clear as a judge's order. This woman and her son are under medical care. Any legal proceedings can wait 48 hours per Arizona law. After they left, Amara turned to Marcus, her voice choked with emotion. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. 20 years ago, he said slowly, no one stopped to help my sister. She and my nephew died, cold and alone by the side of a road like this one. He paused, a shadow crossing his eyes. And Richard, he tried to ruin me when I refused to sell him the patent for my sunscreen formula. 3 days later, in the sleek office of attorney Zoe Washington, hired by Marcus Glamma. Amara sat frozen as she listened to the Pattersons' accusations. They say you're mentally unstable, that you once tried to extort them, so. An elegant black woman with Fulani-style braids stated bluntly. They're also accusing you of stealing jewelry and fabricating a victim's story. How can they twist the truth like that? Amara nearly broke down. Because they have money, power. Eleanor Patterson comes from a very influential family. Zoe tilted her head, locking eyes with Amara. The question is, what do you have? Amara stayed silent. Then she opened her bag and pulled out a small silver USB drive, placing it on the table. Lately, I started noticing strange things, Amara said, her eyes drifting into the distance. Papers about Nathan's custody suddenly showed up, marked urgent for my signature. My bank account was frozen without warning, and, she hesitated, I started recording conversations after the housekeeper warned me about their plans. Zoe plugged the USB into her laptop. The room fell silent as Eleanor Patterson's icy voice filled the air. David should never have married her. A black school teacher, no status, no name. But we'll correct that mistake. The boy carries Patterson blood. He won't be raised by her. Did you feel a chill hearing those words spoken so casually, yet so cruelly? Zoe held her breath as more recordings played. Discussions about faking psychological reports, instructions from Richard to have their driver drop Amara and her son somewhere where no one would ever find them. This changes everything, Zoe said, eyes gleaming with resolve. But we'll need more evidence. They'll accuse you of illegal manipulation. And they'd be right, Amara admitted. Recording without consent is against the law in Arizona. I checked. Zoe looked at her, clearly impressed. A literature professor who understands surveillance laws? I used to volunteer at a women's shelter every weekend, Amara said softly. I've seen too many women get hurt, and no one believed them. In the safe house Marcus had arranged, Amara spent every night meticulously organizing documents, texts, notes, each a piece of the puzzle for justice. Carmen Diaz, the former Patterson housekeeper who had quit after witnessing an assault, helped care for Nathan so Amara could focus on gathering proof. They think I'm broken, Amara whispered one night. They believe I'm just a penniless woman who'll give up her child if they throw money at me. But they were wrong. Marcus watched the transformation. The woman who once collapsed on the edge of the desert had now become a quiet but unyielding force. What are you planning? He asked, eyeing the neatly sorted folders. Amara looked up, her eyes burning with resolve. Eleanor once said I wasn't refined enough to be a Patterson. Let's see what a lowly literature professor can really do. Meanwhile, back at the Patterson estate, Eleanor poured drinks for Phoenix's elite. That woman clearly has psychological issues, she said with a polite smile. Nathan will be back where he belongs, just a few more weeks. Richard proudly showed off a photo of Nathan like a trophy, fueling the image of a picture-perfect family concerned for their grandchild. But what they didn't know was that at that very moment Amara was contacting dozens of people the Pattersons had trampled. Wrongfully fired staff, betrayed business partners, exploited housekeepers who had been silenced. Have you ever seen a storm born from whispers? Because sometimes the strongest weapon against arrogance isn't money or power, but the quiet persistence of survivors who watch, wait, and strike when the moment is right. While the Pattersons toasted their illusion of victory, their every move was being recorded by a growing network of allies quietly banding together for justice. Amara leaned in and whispered into Nathan's ear as he slept. Can you imagine it, sweetheart? What it'll be like when they realize the woman they left to die in the desert not only survived, but learned how to thrive in the harshest place, like those desert plants that look fragile but hold an unexpected strength deep inside. On the day of the preliminary hearing, the atmosphere at the Maricopa County Courthouse was thick, like the moments before a storm. In the main lobby, a crowd of curious eyes gathered, local reporters, prominent attorneys, and concerned citizens, all drawn by the rumors that the powerful Patterson family was about to face an unprecedented legal reckoning. Eleanor and Richard Patterson walked in with the kind of confidence worn by people who had never lost a battle in their lives. Eleanor, dressed in a pristine pearl gray suit, offered a graceful nod to Judge Lawrence Griffin, a longtime friend of the Patterson family for 3 generations. Richard grinned with satisfaction as he spotted 2 school board members who happened to rely heavily on his annual donations. When Amara entered alongside Zoe and Marcus, Eleanor leaned slightly toward Attorney Fletcher, her lips curling into a scornful smirk. "She's still trying to look composed," she sneered. Judge Griffin banged his gavel. "We are here to review the petition for temporary custody of Nathan Jenkins, filed by Mr. and Mrs. Patterson." Fletcher stood, flashing a well-rehearsed smile. "Your Honor, my clients are model citizens, deeply concerned for the safety and future of their grandson. Ms. Jenkins, however, has exhibited emotional instability and is unfit to provide a secure environment for the child." Zoe Washington remained seated, calmly flipping through documents, her unbothered demeanor beginning to unsettle Eleanor. "My clients request temporary custody," Fletcher concluded, handing a file to the judge. "Mrs. Washington, would you like to respond?" Judge Griffin asked. Zoe stood slowly, her voice unusually composed. "Your Honor, I don't intend to dispute the petition today. Instead, I'd like to make a simple request." A buzz of whispers spread through the courtroom. Eleanor turned to Richard, visibly confused. "My client agrees to allow the Pattersons a supervised visit with Nathan," Zoe continued. "But before that, I ask the court to view a brief video." "Your Honor, this is highly irregular," Fletcher shot up. "We're here to discuss custody, not watch a documentary." Judge Griffin hesitated, but curiosity won out. "What video, Ms. Washington?" "A short clip," Zoe replied. "It documents events that led us here today. I believe it will clarify several misunderstandings." At last the judge nodded, the lights dimmed, a screen descended on the side of the courtroom. The first image froze Eleanor in place. Surveillance footage from the Patterson estate appeared. In it, Richard forcefully shoved Amara down the steps, while Eleanor screamed, "Take that woman and her bastard child somewhere no one will ever find them." The courtroom held its breath. The video continued, exposing scheme after scheme, conversations about eliminating the problem, emails between Eleanor and Fletcher discussing falsified psychological evaluations, and documents revealing attempts to alter David's will after his death. And the final piece? The undeniable truth. Nathan, now recovered, sat in front of the camera and recounted everything he had witnessed. His voice was heartbreakingly mature. "Have you ever imagined a courtroom no longer being a place for arguments, but one where the truth rises and strikes through deceit?" "Grandma Eleanor said, 'Mom didn't deserve to live,'" Nathan said in the last clip. "Grandpa Richard hit her when she tried to protect me." When the lights came back on, the courtroom fell into stunned silence. Eleanor's face was as pale as a sheet, her lips pressed tightly together, unable to form a word. Richard lowered his head, avoiding every gaze. Attorney Fletcher fumbled with his tie, visibly rattled. Zoe stepped into the center of the courtroom, her voice unwavering. "Your Honor, we are formally filing criminal charges against Eleanor and Richard Patterson for attempted murder, assault, document falsification, and obstruction of justice." Judge Griffin adjusted his glasses with trembling hands. Mr. Fletcher, do your clients have anything to say? Fletcher was speechless, unable to utter a single word. Eleanor tried to stand, but her legs gave way. Richard leapt up and shouted, "It's all fake, some tech trickery." At that moment, the back doors of the courtroom opened. Carmen Diaz walked in, followed by 3 former Patterson employees. "I saw everything, Your Honor," Carmen said, her voice strong and composed. "And I'm not the only one." Less than an hour later, Eleanor and Richard were escorted out of the courthouse in handcuffs, camera flashes going off like fireworks. Once untouchable, they had now become symbols of corruption exposed. In a quiet hallway, Amara sat silently, her hands trembling slightly. Marcus stood beside her, saying nothing, never touching her, simply present, a steady anchor in the storm. "How did we do this?" she whispered, her eyes still fixed on the doors through which justice had just emerged. "Not we," Marcus replied. "You. Your courage to document the truth. Your brilliance in building this case. I just provided the tools. The strategy you created." Inside Judge Griffin's private chambers, an internal investigation was already underway, focusing on his suspicious ties to the Patterson family. At the police precinct, Fletcher was frantically negotiating an immunity deal in exchange for revealing past crimes committed by the Pattersons, including the truth behind the crash that had claimed David's life. All across Phoenix, people buzzed about the black schoolteacher once dismissed and disrespected, who not only survived, but dismantled a century-old empire with resilience and intellect. Outside the courthouse, Nathan played with other children, his laughter ringing like a bell that drove away the darkness, as though the ghosts of the past had finally let him go. "Do you know what earns the deepest respect?" Marcus spoke softly, eyes on Amara. "It's that you didn't act out of vengeance. You acted for justice, for protection." Amara looked over at her son, then glanced at the headlines lighting up the phones around her. "The Patterson dynasty crumbles. Single mother exposes murder plot." "There are 2 kinds of people in this world," Amara said, her voice soft but solid as stone. "Those who believe power is meant to crush others, and those who understand that real strength is staying whole even when the world tries to break you." Against the fiery sunset sky of Phoenix, the city's towering buildings looked like fading shadows, symbols of a power structure on the brink of collapse. A new order was taking shape, and those once considered untouchable were beginning to panic, because they realized somewhere out there are still people like Amara, people who were once silenced but are now ready to speak. And at the center of this sweeping shift was a woman once left to die beneath the blinding desert sun, not only surviving, but learning to harness that very light to expose truths long buried in the shadows. 2 years had passed since that fateful day in court, the day everything changed forever. The mansion that once symbolized the power of the Patterson family is now a support center for women who have experienced abuse and racial discrimination. What was once a place that filled Amara with fear every time she crossed its threshold has become the place she now leads, with poise, in a tailored navy blue suit, guiding a team of volunteer attorneys through hallways once steeped in oppression and deceit. "Imagine this," Amara said, her voice steady. "When women come to us, they've already been turned away at least 5 times by other organizations. Our mission isn't just to provide shelter or legal aid, it's to restore the most precious thing society has stripped from them: dignity." The former office of Richard Patterson, once a hub for ruthless schemes, is now a legal library. Nathan helps younger children with homework. In a nurturing environment, free from the shadow of being a Pattersonaire, he's thriving in math and science. Today, Nathan is simply the son of Amara Jenkins, the woman who turned personal pain into a social revolution. Eleanor Patterson is serving the third year of her sentence for conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice. The cold, stark walls of her 10-by-10 cell are decorated only with newspaper clippings about the trial, a pathological fixation psychologists have labeled the inability to accept personal fault. Richard, sentenced to 5 years in prison, has visibly deteriorated. Just months behind bars have aged him decades, stripped of the privileges that once sustained him. In the main conference room, Marcus Reynolds and Zoe Washington signed documents. The Jenkins Reynolds Foundation had just officially acquired its 10th facility, set to be renovated into a legal aid center for underserved communities. "I think we can expand to Chicago next month," Marcus said, his expression more peaceful than it had been since the day he met Amara. Carmen Diaz, now the foundation's executive director, entered with a radiant smile. "CNN just confirmed. They'll be here Thursday to film a special report on transformative justice. They want to interview you, Amara." But Amara's transformation extended beyond her professional work. The woman who once walked with her head down is now a sought-after speaker at law schools across the country. Her story has inspired new legislation on domestic violence and racial injustice in 4 different states. "Do you know what I admire most about you?" Zoe said one afternoon as they watched Nathan playing with other children at the center. "It's not just what you've accomplished, but how you've done it, without ever losing your humanity." Amara smiled, her eyes following her son. "I've learned that justice isn't about destroying the enemy. It's about rebuilding what they tried to break with heart and making it stronger than ever." Across town, Theodore Fletcher, the former Patterson family attorney, is now teaching legal ethics at the University of Arizona, a deeply ironic outcome, but also proof that change, even delayed, is possible. As part of a sentencing agreement following his cooperation in the investigation, Fletcher now begins every lecture with the same line: "I learned in the hardest way possible that the line between representing a client and becoming their accomplice is much thinner than we think." On a gentle spring afternoon in the garden of the center, Marcus and Amara walked side by side, discussing plans to expand community justice centers. Their relationship had evolved naturally, from allies to friends to true life partners. "You've turned tragedy into a life's mission," Marcus said softly. "Do you know how many lives have changed just because you chose to rise instead of bowing to injustice?" Amara paused, then gave a quiet smile. "Sometimes I still wonder, what if you hadn't stopped the car that day?" "I would have found another way," Marcus said without hesitation, "because people like you always find a path forward even when the world turns its back." That evening, a letter arrived at the center from the Arizona State Prison. The sender, Eleanor Patterson. "I used to think she might ask for forgiveness," Amara said after reading the letter filled with bitter accusations, "but some people would rather drown in hatred than admit they were wrong." "So what are you going to do with it?" Marcus asked. Amara folded the letter and slipped it into a file folder. "I'll use it in my psychology lectures to show how privilege can distort a person's perception of reality. She still thinks I set a trap, still believes I manipulated the entire system. She can't accept that the very system she exploited all her life finally did what it was meant to do." Through the window they watched Nathan teaching a young girl how to play chess. His patience and kindness were a living reflection of the values Amara had held on to, even in her darkest moments. "You know what real victory looks like?" Amara smiled, her gaze on her son. "It's not watching the Pattersons get punished. It's knowing Nathan will grow up without carrying a single ounce of hatred in his heart." On the center's walls hung photos of dozens of families who had been helped, each image telling a quiet story of rebirth and triumph over adversity. In every set of eyes, there was something shared, not the look of survivors, but of people who had found purpose through their pain. "They say the sweetest revenge is living well," Amara said, as she and Marcus stepped into the garden. "But I found something even better, using your painful experiences to spare others from going through the same suffering. That's not just living well, it's living meaningfully." And as the sun set behind the roof that once symbolized oppression and prejudice now transformed into a beacon of hope, one truth stood firm. Humanity's greatest power doesn't lie in what we achieve, but in what we choose to build from the ashes others tried to leave us in. If this story touched your heart, and you believe that justice is not just about punishing the wicked, but about turning wounds into the drive to save others, follow our channel. Because the most powerful stories aren't about villains falling, but about the wounded discovering they were heroes all along, just waiting for the moment to rise. If you believe that justice isn't just written in verdicts, but lives in the resilience of those who have been hurt, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Because here, you won't just hear stories about victims. You'll witness their journey to becoming heroes